All right. Do y'all see Affinity?
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Oop, all right. There it goes. So I'm running this in VMware under Linux with a single core. So if anything looks slow, it's just because I'm running it in a very poor environment compared to anyone running it on a modern Windows machine. So don't think it's slow just because my updates might seem a little slow. It's I'm sure it's quite snappy on a modern computer. So I'm assuming everyone here has some familiarity with Photoshop or GIMP or some kind of image photo processing software. And Affinity is one that kind of has been under the radar for a while. A few of us have kind of seen it, but never really dug into it. And then this release came out about a month ago, version 1.9, that added features that are targeting astroimaging, astrophotography specifically. So it seems like they are aware of this, what we're doing in our audience, and are have some imagers there themselves. So that's pretty exciting. Of course, the other thing nice about Affinity is you buy it once, and if you get it on sale, it's about equivalent to 2 months of renting Photoshop. So it's insane how inexpensive it is. So it's a lot to be excited about. Um, Pretty much, it's a lot like Photoshop. You can tell they have taken inspiration. You have all these menus, and some of them look very similar. You have filters, and some of these filter names probably look kind of familiar. I mean, there's only so many ways to do certain operations in image processing, so you expect some similarities. And then over here you have layers, and down here you have like channels. You have a info window. All this stuff up here. You have a histogram. So all these things are very similar. So we seem to have settled down in people joining. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to show just some simple examples of processing astroimaging files. I'm not going to get into anything too complex. I think this is more just to show people who use Photoshop that to do the similar operations in Affinity is different, but not substantially different. My main problem I've had is this muscle memory, trying to hit certain keystrokes or looking for a menu somewhere that I've been using Photoshop 17 years. So I'm like looking in the wrong place, but after I use it about a week or two, I got that figured out. So I think anyone can switch over pretty easily. Now, one of the things they added, one of the things about Affinity, which may or may not be the same as Photoshop, let me make a caveat. I'm using a version of Photoshop from 2006 still, because it does everything I need. So if I act like I'm showing you something new and it's in the current version of Photoshop, just excuse me, because I've never used any Photoshop newer than about 2005. So they have these things called personas in Affinity, and one of them is this astrophotography stack. And so it's going to kind of change the user interface here for a minute. We kind of jumped into a different mode. But the thing to look at is over here on the right side in the middle. This is where you actually put in your files for stacking. And you could have multiple file groups. I think that means you could put multiple nights of data in here. You specify what you're loading, light, bias, dark, flat, or flat. So they get the terminology. They know what's going on there. For stacking options, it's okay. So let me just say right now, this is not going to replace Astro APP or PixInsight. That's what those are designed to do. But if you went out and you took 20, 30 DLSR frames and you just wanted a quick stack and play with them, I think this is going to be great. If you have 600 frames from your CMOS camera, you would blow this up. I don't think it will stack that. So just with that understanding. Sigma clipping is the best thing they have for any sort of pixel rejection of satellites and other things. I haven't played with these sliders, but it's pretty much the same sort of clipping thresholds and iterations other stacking software would have. And then if you have raw frames, you can select different raw options, balances. I'm not going to be doing that today, but anyway, it will stack one-shot color files as well. So let's see here. Let's do a quick sorry. Let's do a quick stack. So let me find some files. Oops, sorry. There we go. Let's see. So I shot some H alpha last month, so we're just going to throw those in here real fast. Let's see. That was the 27th. Right. There we go. So I have this set as light, and I'm just going to grab a few because I don't want us to sit here all day. So we'll just do 10. And so it loaded them, and you'll see it did kind of a bit of a stretch to show you the frames. If you click on a different frame, it'll switch to that frame. There's a little eyeball here. If you turn that off, then it will not stack that frame. And where that comes in useful is down here at the bottom. It says best flight frames. So if you click on that and change it, and it hasn't done this calculation yet, it's going to go through, and it's kind of like subframe selector, although I don't think it's quite as extensive in what it analyzes. I think it's mostly looking at star sizes and maybe contrast. But anyway, it's going to go through these 10 frames, and it's going to compute a score for each one. And so if I say use the best half of my frames, you'll see it turned off automatically this little eyeball. That means those frames will not be stacked. You know, if I keep reducing it, you'll see some of them go away. If I put it at 100%, they all come back. So what's that good for? Well, you know, if you have some frames that didn't guide well, or you kicked your tripod or something, this is probably going to get rid of those. If you had a few subtle clouds come through, I'm not sure this is going to pick that up like you can in subframe selector, because in that case, the number of stars in your frame is going to drop because of the clouds. So again, this is good for sort of just, I have a nice casual evening of imaging. I want to stack it real quick and use it. And yes, I've posted 2 images I did with this and didn't ever load PixInsight. So it does work. So let me go through. I got to put in some dark frames. So you switch this over to dark, and then you find your files. And my dark frames are from the 29th. So I just need some 180-second darks to match those lights. And then I need some dark flats, which would be these 3-second darks. And then I want to put my flats in. And that would be here. All right. So need to clean the sensor off. All right. So we got flats, dark flats, darks, and then my lights. I don't use bias frames because I use the dark flats for the offset of the flat frames. At the moment, there's no way to save these file lists. So once you loaded everything up, if you wanted to come back and work on it later, you'd have to reload everything. So that's why I said it's for casual projects. If you are doing a 6-night project and you did 5 nights and stacked it, if you wanted to stack the 6th night, the next day, you'd have to come back and load all that stuff in again. So again, I wouldn't recommend it for that. That's what PixInsight is great for. All right, so up here at the top, there's a little button called Stack. And it's going to go through, and it does a bad pixel mask. And as far as I can tell, you can't tune that. It just has its own idea of what bad pixels are going to look like in your dark frames, I imagine. and then it just automatically uses that. So these shouldn't take too long.
Mike, are these already aligned?
No, it'll do that also.
Okay.
And yeah, why is it taking so long? Huh. No, it seems to do a pretty good job of aligning frames. And you can actually use that later. I'll show another case where you can use it to align frames. Now so they just came out with a 1.9.1 within the last couple of days. I didn't upgrade because I've been using this one, and since I was going to do this workshop, I didn't want to jinx anything. Hopefully, let's see. This is taking a little longer than the first time I ran it, so I hope I didn't jinx it. But what it'll do next is it'll go through and just stack the frames. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there is no cancel. One of the fixes I saw in 1.9.1 was the fixing the cancel button for stacking. But oh, there we go. While we're waiting, are there any other questions about Affinity, or anyone want to make any comments?
Well, I think for me, it'll be really interesting to see what happens when you get into layers and doing different things with that, if that's part of the menu today.
Yep, definitely.
Just seeing it done, because the like you say, the muscle memory is completely different than Photoshop.
Yeah, the way layers work very similarly, but masks are a little different. I don't know how many people have played with mask in Photoshop, but a mask in Photoshop is, some people might be familiar with it as an alpha layer. It's an image that's black and white, grayscales that determine the visibility of the pixels from that particular layer. And in Photoshop, it's treated as an image, and almost every tool that Photoshop has for manipulating an image, you can apply to the mask. In Affinity, the masks are different in that not all the tools, let's say, for example, in Photoshop, I want a luminance mask. I would pull out the luminance from the image, load that as my layer mask, and then see if it was masking out the different areas like I wanted. If it didn't, I would just run curves on that layer mask as an image, and then manipulate the curve until I get things to look like I want. Well, there's no way to directly apply it where you see the results. It's just different enough that, it took me a while. For example, you have to apply the curve to the alpha layer, not the master layer. That tripped me up forever. All right, so it finished stacking here. And down here at the bottom, you can see it created a stacked image, which is this. When you're done, you just hit apply, and then it will create an image. And so here it created the layers. This is just like the layers in Photoshop. There's a pixel layer, which is the stacked data. And then it created two curves and a levels, which is kind of an initial guess at a good stretch. If I turn these off, you'll see that's the stacked data. Unlike Photoshop, which has like a eyeball on the left. In Affinity, it's just these little check marks to make a layer visible. And that's pretty much it. And then you would just continue to do your processing with this stacked data. So that's kind of neat. They added that. I wasn't going to do much more of a stacking. I think everyone's probably stacked. It's just kind of interesting that a piece of software like this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one question, Mike. Will it do? Can it handle master darks, master flats? Do you know?
If they're FITS files, I believe it will. I haven't tried. I don't think it would. I don't know that it will call from only having one dark frame, if that's the question.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it did,
I'll try.
you could just, yeah. If you
Mike?
did, you could just throw it in there 3 times. It would just average the 3 together and then use it as one, I guess. But
Got a
so
question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, what if you're doing like RGB? Is there a way to designate a alignment frame that's not part of the stack so you can pick one to align them all the filters
Right.
on the same one?
I don't think so. The guy James is the fellow at Affinity. I guess the company's name is Serif, but I'm going to keep saying Affinity. He's put out a bunch of videos that talk about processing one-shot color, narrowband, LRGB, and I haven't watched all of them, but as far as I can tell at this point, they stack the layers individually. I'll go ahead and show this now. So I'm going to get out of here. So I made a, let's see here. Yeah, so I just took 2 raw frames of M46, and as you can, I'm going to turn off the top layer. Oh, sorry. You can see that. Okay, so here's the bottom layer that's visible. Then I'm going to make the one above it visible, and you can see that they're not aligned.
Right.
So what you can do is you select them both and go under Arrange, and then it has an Align Layers by Stars that you run. And now if I do this, you'll see they're now aligned.
Okay. So you'd make your 3 masters and align them essentially.
You can see they're different frames, right? Because my guiding was in different directions. But
Okay.
so you could stack, which is really slick. If you're ever doing any sort of compositing of frames, I don't know what it has a panorama mode. I haven't tried to use that for a mosaic, but if you just had again, some RGB data and you wanted to do it, align them, you don't have to get in there and use the difference filter and slide it around till they're on top of each other. It'll actually just snap them right on top of each other. I asked them about if they could take that technology that they use for that and then make it so it has a filter that would just generate a star mask. And it sounded like they might be aware of StarNet and they may be thinking of doing something similar. Because one of the things they added in Affinity, if you're on Windows 10 and you have, I guess, an NVIDIA GPU, apparently they support that. And in some of the videos I saw, he was running some really heavy filters that even on a fast machine kind of chugged. And with the GPU, it was doing it in real time as he was moving the cursor around. It was pretty amazing what GPU acceleration can do. So again, this was just demonstrating that it has the ability to align frames. So let me get back to that H alpha data. And speak up if you have a question. This is pretty informal. Let's see. What did I call that one? Well, let's just talk about another thing they added. So here's that M46 data stacked. So you can see its color. And it was already calibrated in PixInsight. It looked kind of nice. I just went in and threw in an offset. So if you look at his histogram in the upper right corner, you'll see the blue, the red, and the green peaks are in different places. And that's why the background of this image looks mostly red, greenish with a reddish tint. They have a new filter under astrophotography called Remove Background. And it dropped, I don't know if you can see it, I'm pulling it around, this little circle. That's a sample point. You can also just guess and say, I want to take out some red and I want to take out some green. And you could do it by hand, but why do that when they have this nice sampler? So I'm going to make the radius of that sample 20 pixels. And then you click on this sample at handle position. And as you move it around, it's gauging what the background is and subtracting it. Now it kind of overdid it. That's what this output black level slider is for. So it's a little dark because it subtracted off the offset. So you could start to just dial this up and add back in some background. So you can see it took out the color cast. And if you look at the histogram now, all the peaks are lined up. So that's kind of slick because I was trying to do stuff with Affinity and even Photoshop before one of the workshops I did, and just trying to take RGB and combine them and then neutralize the background. You can do it with the levels, but it's kind of a pain. This is nice because it's all automatic. So again, this is what you would use to neutralize the background. If you've ever taken one-shot color data also, you probably, when you load that stacked data up, the background is not black. It usually has a color to it. So again, you would just take this tool and use it to neutralize that background in a few clicks. So it's pretty slick.
You can also have more than one sample if you have a gradient.
Right. So the other thing you can do, as mentioned, is, so I took that same data and just added a gradient. I don't know how well it shows up on Zoom, but it's darker here and brighter in this corner because that's how I made the gradient.
Pretty good.
So again, I don't know why they set it to 5 pixels. Just because of noise and other things, I would make it only goes up to 20, but that's how big an area it's sampling. So we'll put this first sample up here. And then at the bottom, it says drag handles to set levels, drag to set global radius, click to add a handle. So I'm going to put a handle in that corner. It's not going to do anything until I hit this sample at handle position. And it won't work. Yeah, I have had, see, I think I got in trouble because I put them in before I hit that. There we go. I've had interesting results with this. So this was a perfectly linear gradient that I put in because I created it with Affinity and it sort of took it out. You know, you can still see there's a bit of a gradient there. Not as bad as it was. If I start adding points, you know, it doesn't seem to improve, but it does help some. You know, so that's one area hopefully they will work on because they have some really sophisticated filters for more terrestrial daytime photography that I bet in the guts of those algorithms is something that would make easy work of most of our gradients. So, you know, it's just how much a priority that is for their sales if they actually think a lot of astronomers are using this. But you can use Gradient Exterminator with this, which I was going to demonstrate, but my version of Gradient Exterminator is about 15 years old and it's 32-bit and won't work with this 64-bit Affinity. And I looked to upgrade it and I can't remember now, but it was over $50 for Gradient Exterminator, which after I managed to collect my jaw off the floor, you could buy PixInsight or APP for not a whole hell of a lot more than that and has a lot more features. So if you want to do gradient removal, I would recommend PixInsight, APP, or Investigating Cirrel, which has something similar to what I'm showing you here, but it works a little better. If you want Gradient Exterminator, it's a great piece of software, but I just was kind of surprised. I figured that was about a $15 piece of software, but anyway, we're talking about Affinity today. So that's the other way you can use this. I've tried it on complex gradients and it didn't do very well. And they understand that. It was really designed for just a simple gradient or to neutralize your background. And even for that, it's a really handy tool. I'll certainly be using it.
So just a quick comment on that. So I've had all my pictures have complex gradients. So I've been using the median blur to create a background to subtract out, and that's worked really well in Affinity.
That there are techniques from Photoshop to model the background as you're describing that you can certainly implement in Affinity as well, I'm sure. So there are other tools you can fall back on. That's a good point. All right, let's look at another filter I've been liking. So this is some kind of messy M31 data I had. I took it with 200 millimeter lens with it open too far. So, you know, I hadn't seen this kind of stuff since I owned a Sky 90. But yeah, some blue and purple bloating around the stars. That's just because the blue light did not focus as well. The lens is not corrected well at the blue wavelength. So there are a bunch of techniques we used to use to do this, but as someone brought up, I think Jamie, a few months ago about Photoshop, there are filters to handle this stuff. So one thing I'm going to do is, so I just stacked, you know, took a stacked image from PixInsight, and then I just finished stretching it here. So that's what all these adjustment layers are. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of running this on a compromised environment. It's nothing wrong with Affinity. It's just I choose not to have a Windows 10 box. So I'm emulating it under Linux. So some things tend to be kind of slow. What you can do, because what's happening is if I run a filter now on this, it has to first calculate all these layers on this image and then compute the filter on top of that. And that takes some time. So what you can do is do merge visible, and it'll go through, and every visible layer is going to flatten. Photoshop has a similar operation. And it created, so I can turn all these off now, because this layer that I just created, this pixel layer, is equivalent to all of those other layers. And I've found that things run really fast when I do that. So this is the same image we were playing with before. And then there's, down here, you can put a layer mask on it. There are adjustments. We're probably familiar with curves and levels. They have selective color, which was the important one for anyone doing narrowband, and a bunch of other stuff. But they also have what's called live filters, which I think Photoshop might call smart filters. These are filters, but they are not destructive. They just act as an adjustment layer, and they don't modify the original data. And that is pretty slick compared to the way we used to have to do that. So what I'm looking for is, and I can't find it, defringe. So this is, so now you'll notice one thing, it dropped that adjustment under the pixel layer. My understanding is that means this adjustment will only operate on that image layer. If I grab this and slap it on top, then it would be operating on all of those. In Photoshop, if you had your filter or adjustment above a layer like this and you would alt right click on it, it would shift over slightly and a little arrow would appear and point at the layer below it. That's how you would lock that adjustment to that layer. Here, you just kind of drop it in and it kind of falls underneath. And if you close and open this, you can see it's only associated with that layer. So that's a little different. Right, so what does this filter do? Well, you pick a fringe color, and unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there's no picker. You can't go out and click on it. But it's sort of, they sort of know what's going on here because it defaults to a color kind of between blue and purple. The tolerance, the higher the tolerance, the more likely, I mean, the more generous it is matching that color. Radius is the area of effect. This threshold, the higher it is, then it needs to be a brighter pixel, I think, because if I start sliding this down, you'll see that it kicked in at some point. I don't know if that's showing up, but the purple went away. If I push it back up, the purple's back. So what I do is just kind of drop this down. You can play with the radius. That just means it's going to affect a bigger area. If you make it too small, it's so, I set the radius to 2, then it's probably only working in the core of the star.
That's very similar to the PixInsight tool, but much smarter.
So, right. one of the things to know is if you put the cursor over a numeric field like this and you go up and down with your scroll wheel, it adjusts it by 1, which is kind of nice. So that, anyway, if I look around the image now, and I can just close it. This is a live layer. I can turn it off. Let's find some ugly stars. There we go. I can turn it back on. If for some reason I wasn't sure that was right, I just double click on it and I can go play with it again. So it didn't change the pixel data. It's just a adjustment filter that gets applied to it. And, you know, I can duplicate it. And let's see. These stars are kind of green. I don't like that. I'm kind of lazy. So let's just go and move this over into the green, and you'll see all those green stars have turned kind of a pale. Now, I don't know what color they're supposed to be. I lost all that. This is probably more green because my background probably has a green cast to it. But if I keep dropping this threshold, you'll see, look at these stars right here, for example. If I pop it up, they're going to go back to green. If I drop it enough, they'll go there. If I drop it enough, it probably would actually take the green out of the background. But mostly that's going to be useful if you, let's say you're imaging with a doublet or a poorly corrected camera lens and you get these kind of purple halos, or you're combining narrowband data and your O3 and your O sulfur 2 stars are a little bigger than your HA or something like that because you had to stretch them more, and you get these halos. This is a good tool for just quickly getting rid of those. So any questions about that?
Hey, Mike, this is Tom.
Yeah.
How did you get into that live defringe? What menu? Where do you go to?
Right. Yeah, I'll just start over. Let me get rid of these two. All right. So this first one is for a layer mask. This one's for like curves adjustments. This is for layer effects. I don't know if you use that very often for astronomy. This last one is called live filters. And it's down here near the bottom called defringe.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. It seems to remember the settings to some degree. All right. While we're just sitting here, there's another one called Vignette, which we'll just throw on here.
Quick, while you're doing that, I realized yesterday also the all these live layers act as a mask, so you can
oh, cool.
tweak them.
Right. So what I'm showing you is I don't have any vignetting in this image, but it's applying so it's already flat. But imagine if you had vignetting where your center is bright and your corners are darker. This filter would be brightening the corners without brightening the core. So it would kind of offset that vignetting. The hardness is how sharp that transition is. And scale is doing something similar. So anyway, it's just a nice tool if you didn't get flats and you're trying to clean your image up. So they have things like that. So these are just sort of the tools. We'll get into the layers and some of the magic stuff now, because I learned something today from that link Steve posted in the chat here. That was pretty slick. So let's go look at, yeah, let's just grab this. All right, so this is just a quick evening of some L data on a little galaxy I took with my C8, and I stacked it in PixInsight because I had 270 1-minute exposures. So I don't think Affinity knows how to use swap. So I think it tries to load every image into RAM. So if you have an absurdly huge computer, it might load all those, but I don't. I only have 28 gigabytes. So, all right. So I don't know how well this shows up. We got pretty good signal here in the core. It's pretty kind of salt and peppery noise kind of going around on the outside. And so I'd like to clean some of that up. So the first thing I would do, I took this on my C8, and as you can see, it's not really well corrected out here at the edges, and I know that. So I picked targets that fit in the good area. So we're going to crop this guy down. So for that, you just hit C, and they got this nice little crop tool with the rule of thirds markers for you. So we'll just kind of do that, and then you hit apply. So there we cropped it down. And it'll make things run faster too. So the typical way I would have done this in the past would be to run the noise filter, use an inverse luminance mask on it, which means the mask would protect this area because I don't want noise reduction in here. And out here, it would apply noise reduction. And the way that would work would be something like this. You would, since I have a luminance mask already, I would duplicate this layer somewhere. And then I would do denoise. And I want that on this layer. So, yeah, so this is, let me rename this. There, let's call that. All right, so that's my mask. I'm going to invert it. And then here's the trick that I can never remember. You have to, this is where it gets, and I have been doing this for a couple of weeks. I still forget. So my understanding, it's called a pixel layer. You need to rasterize it to a mask. This operation you get by just right clicking. So now it says it's a mask. It's doing some sort of bookkeeping internally so that it treats it as a mask and not pixel data. And then you would say mask to below. So now that mask, yeah, so it didn't do what I wanted. I think, so just bear with me. I think you have to drag it and put it, you see this little blue box that appears? That's applying the mask to the noise reduction, not to the layer. And this is what I was speaking of earlier, where there's some operations that are different than Photoshop. The results are the same, but the methodology is a little different. So now I have applied that inverted mask to my noise reduction. Let me bring that back up. So let me crank up, let's zoom in. All right. So this first slider is how strong the noise reduction will be. That's no noise reduction. I don't know if that shows up. Maybe I should put a curve on here. Maybe the noise was a little more obvious with that. Right. So, so let me just crank that up so we can actually see what's going on. So you can see it smoothed the background out quite well. If you had a color image, there's a color slider, so you can do more. You can do independent noise reduction and color, chrominance space, and the luminance. Not exactly sure what contribution does. Detail is trying to preserve what it thinks are real features against the noise reduction. I haven't played with that much. I usually leave that in the middle. All right, so let's just take that. And then if I look at my mask, if I did this right, yeah, okay. So if you watch the core here, there's no masking going on. If I turn the mask on, you'll see some details came back in the core. But it's still not protecting it quite well enough. So I need to make that area darker. So if you alt-click on the mask, like in Photoshop, you can see the mask. So this is the actual mask that's protecting the original image but you can see it's only really dark here. And where it's black means that the filter, the noise filter, will not apply at all. So it's not doing a whole lot here. So what we need to do is adjust that with curves. In Photoshop, you would just run curves and then run it on this layer. But there is no curves available. So what I have to do and I don't expect anyone to follow this. I'm just mostly showing it so you know what you're getting into if you start trying to do these things in Affinity. And I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions about it. So I got to take this curves and do the same thing, and I got to click it on the side of the mask. So now that curves is going to change the mask. And then the last trick, which took another day to figure out, was I want that curve to affect the alpha layer. So the alpha or the mask layer is what this curves will apply to, not the actual pixel data. So again, just trying to highlight, there's a few tricks here. So what I want is I want to make the dark parts of the image darker. And if you look at these bands in here, when I turn this off, you'll see they got fuzzy because the curves is not applied. And then there's curves where I'm darkening the dark areas and then brightening the bright areas is basically, see, I over brightened it. So this is kind of blind luck because I can't see the changes to the mask. I'm just kind of playing with these sliders and trying to do it. But I think that protected the core better than my original. And I'm still getting the noise reduction I wanted in the outer areas. Let me turn the curves off. Or let's just curve it less. Oh, no, sorry, wrong layer. Oh, one thing I did learn is if you have this slider up for the opacity, if you hit 1, it goes to 10%, 2 is 20, 30, 40, 50. It's kind of slick. So anyway, so that's some noise reduction using a mask that has been adjusted by curves to protect the core versus if I had no mask at all, it would look like that. So that's how you could do it. Alternately, let's just duplicate all that. All right, let's lose that one. And let's lose, oh gosh. Yeah, let's lose all that. So instead, just ignore this bottom background. We're just looking at this guy now. So here's my background, and here is the noise reduction that is blurring everything. There is another way to do this I found out about today. There's a little gear here that says blend ranges. You bring that up. Again, this is going to take a long time to figure out, I'm sure, but I'm slowly learning it. This source layer ranges. What that is essentially a curve to tell it how much for different pixel values to apply the filter, going from black to white. I don't want this to apply to white, so I'm going to slap that all the way down to the bottom. And you can see already that change pulled in some of the detail that was getting noise reduced out. I don't know if that shows up, but. And then I won't, this is like curves, so I can kind of start doing this. Excuse me. So what I've done now is, since I left black at the top, any dark pixels are getting the full effect of the filter. But as you progress towards white or full intensity, this curve is saying apply less and less of the noise reduction effect as you get up to the brightest pixels. You know, if I pull this all the way down, it's effectively turned it off for all pixel values, so that's no good. So the trick is just sort of pull this curve up until your background is getting the noise reduction you want, but your galaxy is protected. And so I did all that just through this simple adjustment here. I didn't have to make a luminance mask and play with it or anything. And you can add points to this, you know, if for some reason you wanted to smooth parts of it, not others. So this is something I just found out about today, but I'm going to be using that a ton because it's a very neat feature. And again,
Does that gear show up on all filters and just like what is it? Apply
yeah,
to?
if I go to like a pixel layer and do that, then in theory, Yeah, I don't know if it does the same thing. Oh, yeah, it's on there. Yeah, it doesn't seem to do the same thing to like a pixel layer, but any adjustment, let's say, for example, there's another nice filter in here called clarity. We'll just put that on top. No. Right there. All right, there, I got it, I think. Yes. It's a little finicky. All right, so clarity is essentially sharpening. You know, if I go crazy with this, it took a second, but you can see it sharpened everything, including all the noise, which I don't want. So again, this time I'm going to do the opposite effect, though. I want it to sharpen bright things and not sharpen faint things. So I'm going to say for black pixels, I want no sharpening. And that by itself did a whole bunch, because you can see the background isn't, but you know, we can help it a little bit. And you know, you want things to kind of have a transition between the sky and the core. You don't want it to just be sharpened out to an edge that's extremely obvious, like a can lid, and then it becomes all smooth. So this lets you kind of feather that effect. So let's see, if I turn off the clarity, it'll take a second. Oh, not the curves. So I may have disabled it completely. Let's see. Yeah, I need a little more fancy curve here. All right, let's see. So that's with clarity on. That's with it off. You can see it's still affecting the background. So, you know, you could get in here. It's going to take a little playing to find where that point is to disable it. But where you protect the background and you still get some effect. So that's off. That's on. So again, this would take a little playing with, but I think it could be an interesting way to, instead of having to mess with luminance mask, you could just do it with this blend range. All right.
Very
So
cool.
let's see. That was that. So that kind of shows masks a bit. So something I would use, let me just flatten all this. Something I used a lot before I had StarNet and PixInsight to do star mask was it Magic Wand in PixInsight. It's a tool where if you click somewhere, it looks around the image for similar pixels and adds them to the selection. So let's see here. Yeah, let's put that. All right. There we go. Okay. So I need to do this because it is extremely slow on my computer if I don't have it as a pixel layer. So here they have some couple choices. The one I've been using is hello. Nope. Oh, let me show one quick thing that's pretty slick. Another way to do a mask real quick. Let's see. This is a gradient tool. Let's make a gradient. There we go. All right, gradient. And we want that to be radial. All right, so what am I doing? So I set up the ellipse tool with a gradient. So in theory, no, it didn't. It always says this to me. I had this problem yesterday. Well, let's not waste time on it. The idea, there's a tool in PixInsight. I can't remember what it's called. It's some goofy thing where you go around and you draw ellipses and things. And for making star masks, it's kind of interesting, I guess, but it's very clunky and it's compared to just doing it, you know, in a imaging program properly. So with this, you can work it around. And so that can be used. That I could use that now as a mask. Now, again, it didn't, you can make it so it'll make it radial. So it actually radiates outwards from the center. I didn't get it right, and I'm not going to spend time on it. But the idea is you can use any shape that you wanted and make a mask out of it and rotate it, size it, whatever. And it's very, for something like this, it might be easier than some of the other ways of creating a mask. So that's a slick little tool. And that's a layer. Well, that you can go back in and modify it later. Everything's live. So what I was going to do was there's a flood select, which, what am I doing wrong here? No. Have y'all used this tool? Anyone? Roland? How have I lost it? Oh, it's way up here. Flood select. All right. So what does that do? Let's see. I'm going to put it in add mode. That means whenever I click somewhere, it's going to add to the selection. I'm going to, and I'm not going to do contiguous. So if I click like in the center of this star, you'll see it selected most of the bright star cores. It happened to pick out part of the galaxy, but let's not worry about that right now. If I click again on this star, then I probably got most of the stars now in the image. And this one's pretty easy to fix. There's a couple ways you can do that. What I would usually do is go to contiguous and put it on subtract, and then just click in the center, and any pixels touching the pixel that I clicked on that match within the tolerance get erased also as part of the selection. So now I have all
awesome.
the stars. Sorry?
That's awesome.
If you go to quick mask, you can see it makes it red where there's no selection. So you can see I've selected all the stars. So what would you do with that? Well, let's see. We need to do one more thing. If you've used Photoshop, this is very similar. Now, one thing that's different that I'm not sure exactly what it does, but you can turn on circular. I'm going to make the selections a little, oh God, yeah. This is why you use the mouse wheel. I want to make them a little bigger so they extend outside of the original size. So I get a little of the background. And then I'm going to feather it just so I don't want a sharp edge on it. So we'll probably feather it a few. So now you can see I have my star selected. And in this case, I'm going to use, it's called a minimum blur, but it's essentially the minimum filter. And this has the circular setting as well, which seems to do a nicer job than not being circular, but I'm not sure what's going on there yet. Now I have this selection going on. So what this is going to do is every pixel it looks around it within the radius I give it, and it finds the lowest pixel value and then replaces them with that value. In this case, since I have a little sky outside of the white star, it's going to replace all these white pixels with black pixels as I increase this and make my stars get smaller until. Now, it doesn't really do a good job getting rid of them because you can see it filled that whole area in with the blackest black. You can go back later and put noise back into the image to fix that if you wanted to. But let's just go with that for right now. And then I'm going to hide my selection. So I overdid it. I don't like that. So it's a live filter. I can just double click on it and try again. So let's do that. So, right. I didn't spend a lot of time on this. You can definitely do a careful job, but even just playing with it for a minute or two, you can, that's basically what people say, reducing stars. That's what you're doing. So you don't necessarily have to have a GPU and Google TensorFlow and a GPU just to reduce stars and make a star mask. We used to do it a different way, but it is handy to have that. Likewise, if you felt like it was too strong, let me crank that back up. You can also just reduce the opacity on that filter and find some Goldilocks area that's just right between no filter and all the filter. So that's another way to, I tend to overdo everything because I know I can go in with opacity and just knock it back. So
Like you hid the selection. Is there a way to know, looking at the program, that a selection is applied?
well, something's a little different is the curve and these adjustment smart filters, they kind of have a mask built in. If I alt click on the filter, it shows me the mask that it's using for that filter. And so that was the selection it was using. But that selection is now was applied to the filter when I created it as a selection. I mean, as a layer mask. And all the checker box pattern just means it's transparent there. So the filter's not applied there, if that makes any sense. If I can say reselect, they did add a nice thing. You can now save the selection as a spare channel, and you'll see it popped up down here. Can you rename it? So that's the star mask, right? So if I kill the selection, so essentially this star mask is now a layer representation of the selection I was using. If I right click on it, I think I can say load the pixel selection and I can get my selection back. So if you had a bunch of selections you wanted, you could just keep adding them down here.
Cool.
And work on them like that. So that's similar to Photoshop, but a little different. Something I didn't show is it will work on 32-bit data. So if you stacked something and you had 32-bit output, you can just load that straight into Affinity and work on it without having to do any sort of HDR transformation or anything, which I think Photoshop, maybe it doesn't still need to do that. But so let's see, about at that hour. I'm certainly can hang around if people want to ask questions. Let me just see if I prepared any other files. No. Nope, I think we did all those. As far as these live filters go, you have blurs. The minimum is definitely good. You have high pass. I tend to do my sharpening with a high pass filter. It works just like in Photoshop, but there's an unsharp mask and a clarity. The vignette and defringe is very useful. Shadow highlights is one people tend to use a lot. And then under here, as I said before, there's selective color. That's really handy if you're trying to take a narrowband color image and tweak the colors towards what you like. They have curves, obviously. HSL is handy for working in certain color spaces. They have an exposure and brights and contrast, but those are very crude adjustments, right? The curves is going to give you a lot better control. But it's there. It's handy for daytime photos for sure. I certainly have other things I can show, but we're hit that 1 hour. So I want to, anyone who might have to leave, if there's any questions right now, let me go ahead and thank you all for coming and then see if there's any questions.
Well, as you were talking, I was following here with some N46 data of my own. And it's interesting how it's consistent in philosophy. In other words, if I just throw all of my RGB in, it'll stack them all in one file. But when I do the add up at the top, you can separate red channel, blue channel, green channel, and you can handle the flats and lights separate.
Oh,
so
gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's philosophically, I do like it. This has helped me a lot, seeing how to associate the tools, that little magic click and drag down on the tool part. I don't think I'd ever figure that out.
It took a while. I don't know. Can y'all see the Firefox I slid over, or is it only sharing Affinity?
No, I see it.
Okay.
I see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go go to their website, they have a ton of tutorials. I typed in Astro in the search box, and you can see they already have tutorials for color equalization, gradients, one-shot color processing, LRGB, SHO, HARG, all this stuff. So they have those. If you don't, you can go in here and you can, let's say you just wanted to learn about filters. Well, they have, an entire section. So one thing I will tell you guys about, there's this thing called a procedural texture. I have no idea what it does, but you can tell from looking at the examples. Like here, they use this one filter with some rules they created to make a custom mapping for HDR. I think it could be really useful for narrowband. I just haven't figured out how yet, but just some anyway. So this goes through, and so
Kind of like a pixel math, isn't it?
yeah, the examples I've seen with it. If I just do a quick, let me just make a color image here. Is this RGB? Yeah. Right. So if you go under live filters and you add where is it? There it is.
There it is.
Yeah. So they have these presets, and what it generally seems to be used for are things like, do I need to, I think I need a layer under it. Let's see. There we go. So it is modifying the image below it, and it has this rule, which is really tiny. You probably can't read it, but essentially it's 2 sine waves based on the X and Y position. So it's mostly seems to be for positional effects. But what's nice is you can add these sliders at the bottom, and you change them. And I mean, this stuff it's basically just an equation that you use for mapping stuff. So maybe it's not for narrowband, but it just seems like this is all done with an equation right here. And if you look at their help page, it makes pixel math look like a 4-function calculator. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on yet, but it seems to have some interesting. As I said, I don't know if it has an application to astro imaging, but to me, it seems like pixel math with sliders, which is kind of neat. So that's something I'm kind of excited about. Yeah, it's a neat. So basically, that's just the filter because the background is white. So it took white and it's blurring it into this amazing pattern with just this simple equation up here. So, I mean, I can't believe this thing's only $50. There's so much to it. It's pretty amazing.
Not
All
to
right.
mention that you get all the updates.
Yeah, I'll install the update when we're done here.
Yeah.
I trust them to some degree, but not that I didn't know that I looked at the fixes. They weren't so much that it would have changed what I was doing today.
I don't know if Photoshop has it, but another neat thing is the crop is non-destructive, so you can click a reveal and get back to your original.
Oh, so if I hit C now and do a crop like that and hit apply, is that right?
Yeah.
Now what would I do?
So hit crop again, and then over on the right, there's a reveal.
And then apply that?
Well, I don't know. On mine, when I did it, I immediately got back the original image.
There
Maybe
is
it's
something
'cause-
under document, I think. If you click on the document menu,
Did I break it?
it's called unclip canvas.
Oh, there you go. That works too.
It's,
Okay, that's good to know. The other thing they have also, I haven't played with, are these snapshots. So let's say I'm going to take a snapshot and I'll just call this version 1. And then we'll do something else to it. I don't know. We'll liquefy it. Oh, I don't know what that does. I never used that. Let's not do that. Well, that's kind of cool. How do I get out of here? oh gosh. Help. Oh,
And the
right,
upper left's
right,
a
right.
done. So
Done. Let's just do something else. Well, I know it. We'll just add a fill layer. Well, let's just change this filter. So let's just say I did this. All right. And I'll call that snapshot 2. So in theory, if you're like, I don't like this one, I'm going to go back to version 1, then you could go back and look at version 1. If I don't like that one, I can go back to version 2. And apparently, I haven't played with it, but there's some sort of healing brush or something where you could actually use those 2 snapshots as layers and then selectively pick color in one from the, it was a little more than I could handle reading it. But anyway, this is kind of nice because you could process for a while and then, okay, I kind of like what I have, but I want to try something else. But let's just, make a version, just like version control for source code or something. So that's pretty neat. Anything else, Roland?
No, I mean, I really recommend people, if they haven't watched those videos, they're pretty short.
Yeah.
And you'll really see kind of like even all the stuff you can do to take a stack and then get a pretty nice looking finished image pretty quickly.
And then when you're done, what you want to do is hit export, and it has all the file types across the top. I tend to use PNG for Astrobin. If you hit more here, you want to make sure you're embedding an ICC profile. That essentially is adding some information to the image that tells it about your display. So when it shows it on someone's web browser on a different display, it'll make adjustments. So hopefully the colors and the tones all look the same. I think by default, it'll pick the right one that you're using. Yeah, so that's pretty handy. And then, it'll, I don't know, preview. Yeah. So, and then you hit export and you save it to disk, then upload that wherever you want it. It will load some Photoshop files. I think I haven't really tried that. It will, if I go to preferences, in theory, like you can see, I tried to load Gradient Exterminator, but it doesn't like it because it's 32-bit and you need a 64-bit. But I've heard that the 64-bit does work. I've seen on Cloudy Nights, there's a few other astronomy-related plugins that people seem to have been able to get to work. So you cannot use actions. I didn't really know Photoshop had actions, but apparently there are some kind of canned actions to do sort of boilerplate astronomy operations. Those don't work. I don't believe there's any way to get those to work with Affinity. The fellow who put together these videos has worked on a set of actions. I think Roland found those, and they do some subset of that. But if you have some actions that you're really dependent on in Photoshop that you use a lot, then you just have to either relearn how to do it in Affinity or you're just paying the Adobe tax, I guess, because they're not going to move over to.
does Affinity have a concept like that so you can create your own?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's got the macros are the things that.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah. Created. Yeah.
What they don't have is they don't have plugins.
Right.
Which would be, ways to implement actually new kind of filters. And people have been asking about that, but yeah, I don't know much about their company or their business model. I can't imagine it's a big company. So I'm just dumbfounded by the amount of features in here. Usually in the past, if you bought an inexpensive image program for under $100 and you started playing with it, it probably wouldn't have layers, and they probably had some tools that looked like Photoshop tools, but they usually didn't have something useful like selective color or just other stuff just with quirky because, it's a cheaper software. But
You get a lot with this
as far as I
program.
can tell, Affinity is not giving up much to Photoshop.
Michael, I just went to the Gradient Exterminator website,
Yeah.
and it's your plug-in for Adobe Photoshop and Affinity Photo.
Yeah. How much is it?
That's a good question. It's a free trial.
Yeah. I guess I could have downloaded a trial, but
They do have a version of it for Affinity.
yeah. Well, I think he's just verified it works with Affinity as a Photoshop plugin that you import. So that's pretty cool. So if you already had that, you could.
Yeah, it's $60.
Yeah, $60. So I think APP is 150.
Yeah.
And PixInsight's 250 now or 200.
I don't know.
I paid.
Wow, when
200.
I got it, it was 140. Wow.
Well, yeah. Well, let's say it's $200. I can guarantee you. So
Yeah.
DBE will run around the block of Gradient Exterminator, and there's probably at least 15 to 30 other tools in PixInsight that are world class that you would get for that 200 instead of $60. So I couldn't in good faith suggest anyone spend that. But if you like the way it works and you don't want to buy PixInsight, it's an option.
Michael, on the edit preferences performance tab, do you have the open GL option in your sandbox?
I don't think so. It's running
In the middle
VMware
top there.
16.
Yeah, it says enable it. Mike,
Where?
I don't know. The very
Here?
bottom check mark. No, below there. Right there.
You can blow my computer up.
Ah,
Yeah, I need
so it's
Windows
supported.
10. This is
All right.
Windows 7 in a VMware. No, I don't need more information, but
I'm using that, and I'm using the NVIDIA acceleration, and it's really fast.
yeah, I might have to build a Windows 10 box at some point just to integrate with the rest of the world. So if I do, I'll definitely put all that stuff in it. But
Just a good thing to let people know if they're running on Windows, and especially if they have an NVIDIA GPU.
oh yeah, definitely. I think I don't know. Have you played with it to see how much it improves?
Oh yeah, it's definitely fast.
Yeah. So basically,
Sorry,
that's not the
what
latest.
setting is you
update.
doing? You're doing
Preferences, performance.
and then OpenCL is what you added to get the hardware.
Yeah, OpenCL, and then if you have supported hardware, there'll be a drop down, or it'll show you your GPU that you can pick if you have more than one.
Oh,
Okay, cool.
RAM usage.
PixInsight is €230 plus VAT in Europe.
Right. So
Gone up even more, I think.
I was just suggesting that you probably get more than 4 times the feature set from PixInsight than you would from a tool that's only takes out gradients. That's all I was saying. And I think Cyril is. I haven't sat down to spend the time. I think Cyril could do a really good job. It has a tool that seems to be somewhere between ABE and DBE that could handle things, but maybe Jordan's played with it. I don't know, but that's another talk.
Well, they're touting that the new version has a lot of improvements, and it seems to be working a little different but better. I haven't really played around with it yet, but for something that's free, I mean it's pretty good actually.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say it's stacking. It's definitely more sophisticated than what's in Affinity. But again, if you went out and did a nightscape or, took 10 frames with your DLSR just on the back, piggybacking on your scope, and you just wanted to see what it looked like without having to download any other astronomy software, I think this would definitely do a good job on it. Because it did a good job with a good set of data. I had 2 sets of data. So I'm really pleased. I'm glad, a few people kind of recommended it, and I had a little time it was worth the time I invested. I got frustrated at first, but once I got past that, it was definitely worth looking at, because it's not just a clone of Photoshop, and it's not a pale copy. It has its own unique features that are, I think, really useful for imaging. All right. Certainly can hang around. If a few people wanted to stay around and see some more things, I'm happy to do it, but that's what I had prepared for today.
No, that was very helpful for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And
Yeah, thanks for
certainly
doing it.
any questions, just throw them up on the imaging list, or you can email me. And if you've learned anything cool, please share it, because I think we're all starting at base zero with this program in some ways.
Yeah, Mike, I like how you brought out the detail in that galaxy. Yeah, that's a very useful.
You could probably do that in GIMP. It would just be a few more steps and maybe just a little more prehistoric in the UI, but it's possible to do it if you work at it. I've done it.
Okay.
Was there another question? All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. If anyone has any ideas or wants to give a workshop, just let me know and I can do one, or I can set it up. I can set up a meeting anytime we want. So it'd be good to take advantage of this. So if not, y'all have a good afternoon, and I'll see you at the next meeting.
Right.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one, Al.